Union Budget 2026, what to expect and why it matters to you. Well, just some hours to go now for Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman to present the country's budget. Let's try and visualize what the big headlines could be from the budget. It may not be a flashy budget, but a shock-proof one that protects growth, provides job security, and one that focuses on global uncertainty management. Hello viewers, welcome to Homework. This is your host, Aman Sharma. Every union budget is preceded by the Economic Survey, a document that quietly sets the intellectual direction for the government policy. If the budget is what, the survey explains the why. The Economic Survey 2026 makes one thing very clear. India is entering a phase where growth must be protected from global shocks, not just accelerated. Budget 2026 will therefore be less about big bang populism and more about resilience, jobs, investment, exports, and household stability. First, what the Economic Survey 2026 is really saying. At the heart of the survey is cautious optimism. India remains one of the fastest growing major economies, but the global environment is becoming tougher. Trade wars, higher tariffs, slowing demand in developed economies, and geopolitical uncertainty are no longer temporary disruptions, they are the new normal. The survey argues that India's growth model must now rely on three pillars: sustained public investment, strong private sector participation, and improved productivity. Instead of stimulus through giveaways, the emphasis is on building long-term capacity, roads, ports, power, logistics, digital infrastructure, and skills. These are the foundations that allow an economy to grow even when the rest of the world slows down. Another key message of the survey is that macroeconomic stability matters. Low inflation, manageable fiscal deficit, and stable public finances are not abstract numbers anymore. They determine whether food prices rise, loan EMIs stay affordable, and government welfare schemes continue without disruption. Budget 2026 is expected to reflect this caution by balancing spending with fiscal discipline. Jobs and livelihoods from growth numbers to real economies. One of the most important and politically sensitive signals in the survey is about employment. While growth numbers look strong, the survey admits that job creation must improve in quality and scale. This is where Budget 2026 becomes crucial for ordinary citizens. Expect the budget to focus on sectors that generate employment, and that too quickly. Construction, manufacturing, logistics, tourism, MSMEs and services linked to technology and green energy. Instead of announcing new employment schemes, the government is likely to strengthen skilling, apprenticeship and credit access for small businesses. For young Indians, this means more emphasis on employability rather than temporary job support. The US tariff challenge, what Budget 2026 can and cannot do. A major global challenge flagged indirectly in the survey is the rising protectionism, especially from developed economies like the United States. Over the past year, the US has imposed or tightened tariffs and compliance rules on several products where India is competitive: steel, aluminium, chemicals, electronic components, and green energy inputs. It is important to understand this very clearly. The union budget cannot force the US to lower tariffs. Trade tariffs are sovereign decisions driven by domestic politics and industrial strategy. What Budget 2026 can do, however, is reduce India's vulnerability to these tariffs. The strategy is likely to be threefold. First, by lowering domestic costs through better infrastructure and logistics, Indian exporters can remain competitive even when tariffs rise abroad. Faster ports, cheaper freight, and smoother customs clearance directly reduce export costs. Second, the budget is expected to strengthen export support systems, faster GST refunds, better export credit, insurance for small exporters, and easier access to working capital. These may sound technical, but for exporters, cash flow is survival. When global demand becomes uncertain due to tariffs, these supports keep factories running and workers employed. Third, the government is pushing Indian industry up the value chain. The survey makes it clear that economies exporting higher value goods suffer less from tariffs than those exporting raw or low value products. This is why Budget 2026 is likely to continue support for electronics manufacturing, defense production, pharmaceuticals and clean energy components. Why free trade agreements matter more than ever now. As global trade becomes fragmented and dispute resolution at the World Trade Organization weakens, countries are increasingly relying on bilateral and regional trade agreements. The Economic Survey treats recent and ongoing FTAs as economic shock absorbers. India's trade agreements with the UAE and Australia have already opened preferential access to large markets. The concluded negotiations, like on the FTA with the European Union, are particularly significant. An India-EU FTA would give Indian exporters access to large, high-income markets with lower tariffs and predictable rules. How does this help citizens? Well, FTAs diversify export destinations. When demand weakens in the US due to tariffs, Indian firms can redirect exports to Europe, West Asia, or Asia Pacific markets. Capital expenditure. Why the government keeps spending on infrastructure? Well, one of the most consistent themes of recent budgets and likely of budget 2026 is high capital expenditure. The Economic Survey defends this approach strongly. Public investment crowds in private investment, creates jobs and improves productivity. For citizens, this translates into better roads, railways, urban infrastructure, hospitals, and power supply. It also has a stabilizing effect on the economy when global trade slows due to tariffs or geopolitical tensions. Domestic infrastructure spending keeps demand alive. Budget 2026 is expected to continue prioritizing capex while keeping revenue expenditure under control. This balance matters because unchecked revenue spending leads to inflation and future tax pressures. Taxes and the middle class. What to realistically expect? Well, on personal income tax, expectations are high, but outcomes may be modest. The survey's emphasis on fiscal prudence suggests targeted relief rather than sweeping tax cuts. Changes in standard deduction, rationalization of deductions, or incentives for long-term savings and insurance are more likely than dramatic slab changes. For most citizens, the bigger benefit may not come from tax cuts but from stable prices, lower inflation, and improved public services, all of which depend on fiscal discipline. Welfare and social protection, continuity with better targeting. Budget 2026 isn't likely to roll back welfare schemes, but it may refine them. What citizens should vote on budget day? Well, for ordinary citizens, four things matter. 1. The size of the focus of capital expenditure because that drives jobs and growth. 2. Tax changes that affect take-home income. 3. Skilling and employment-related allocations for youth. And 4. Export and MSME support measures that keep factories and small businesses resilient amid global uncertainty. The big picture? Well, Union Budget 2026 is not designed to be flashy. It is designed to be strategic in a world that is turning inward. By using infrastructure spending, export diversification through FTAs, and targeted support for industry and households, the government may attempt to shield Indian growth from global shocks like US tariffs. For citizens, the success of this budget will not be measured by slogans, but by outcomes: stable jobs, manageable prices, steady incomes, and visible improvements in everyday infrastructure. In a fractured global economy, that stability may be the most valuable promise any budget can make. Let me take this conversation forward with Subhash Chandra Garg, the country's former finance secretary. Mr. Garg, welcome to Homework. And my first question to you, let me start with the uppermost thing on people's mind, that should the citizens expect any more tax breaks in this budget, because the last year saw big concessions on personal income tax from the government and also the GST cuts.
So thank you for inviting me. I guess when you refer to the citizens, you essentially refer to the rich and the middle class, because the lower class or the poor don't really get taxed. We have in this country now where 10 crore people file tax returns, but less than 3 crores actually pay taxes. So it's there. They would always expect, no one likes to pay taxes. They would again expect that on top of what was done last year, the government gives another concession. But I think the government has realized that such kind of tax concessions are not only very costly for the fisc, but they don't add to what they expected, that this will give boost to the consumption. So there is no evidence that there is a very large uptick in the consumption. So I don't expect this budget to announce any more cuts on the income tax.
Well, and capex spend, sir, every year has also been, a major headline. We have seen large amount of the budget being devoted to capex. Do you think this also could see a further boost this year, or do you think this is not going in the right direction?
See, the capex has been sort of increased massively by the government in last 5 6 years, beginning from about 3.5 lakh crores in 1920 to over 10 lakh crores by 24 25. And currently, for the current year, there is a budget for 11.2 lakh crores. So capex has grown, but you would see the trend that until 23 24, the increase in capex budget was about more than 25% every year, but in last 2 years it's about 10%, and therefore there is a sort of normalization of increase. Now, given the fact that this year there is a very much pressure on the tax receipts of the government, and the possibility of increasing expenditures is not very high, I would suspect that the government would still like to go with a capital expenditure increase of about 10%. I don't expect it to be more than 10%. One more issue in capex to my mind is that if the government can internally change the composition of the capex, we have been spending more than 60% of this capex on basically transportation sector, railways, the roads and the metros, to take it that way. And that has not yielded the kind of returns which were expected from the capex in terms of bringing in the private sector investments, boosting the growth and all. And whereas today, in today's world, there is a different kind of capex which can yield very good and better returns. Let us say energy transitions. We are facing enormous amount of pressure now on the transmission networks because the solar power is coming, though it also needs to be increased at a more rapid pace. But the transmission system and the grid stabilization systems are not able to cope up with even what the increase is coming today. And therefore, if you shift the capex from the transportation and the BSNL's type of capex which we have been doing to transportation, to the electricity, renewable electricity, and also towards the digitalization economy, which requires more of data centers, which requires more of investment in semiconductors and other kinds of production of. So if there is a shift towards this kind of capex, I think that would be better. So I would expect about 10% of increase in capex, and if the government can bring about this sort of change in composition of the capex, that would be great.
Well, Mr. Garg, the economic survey also speaks of resilience, amid the rising global protectionism, especially the US tariffs. From a former finance secretary's perspective, do you think can a budget meaningfully insulate India's economy from such external trade shocks, or are we overestimating what fiscal policy alone can achieve?
See, I don't think we should be talking about insulating Indian economy. We should be talking about integrating Indian economy more and more in the world. Um, of course, there's been a problem in the US FTA, but the government has taken many other steps. Look at the EU FTA, look at the UK FTA. So that is integration with the world, not the isolation. So I don't think, number one, that the government should do anything to insulate Indian economy from the rest of the world. Secondly, to my mind, the budget system. You see, how do you encourage the integration better or make the Indian economy grow faster relative to the rest of the world? Is to encourage investments in the right kind of things, and that includes not only the private investment from the domestic economy, but the foreign investment. So foreign investment, as you would be seeing in the last couple of years, especially the last year, the foreign investments have been declining. Private investment has not been picking up at all. It was only the government investment which was rising. Now, the government need to take up more of the policy measures as well as supportive capital measures.
Well, sir, you spoke about the FTAs and the recent conclusion of, in fact, of the India-EU FTA. In your view, are Indian MSMEs and manufacturers, institutionally ready to actually benefit from these FTAs?
See, there is a lot of misconception about the MSMEs. MSMEs are largely in India today. 90% of them are in the trade and services sector, which does not trade with the rest of the world. The manufacturing MSMEs are very small. I'll just give you a data. Uh, India's manufacturing share in the GDP is only about 12-13%. And we have the data for the corporates as well as the households. The households is what the MSME is all about. And it's only about 8 to 9% of the manufacturing which happens in the household sector. So it's less than 1% of the India's GDP, which is actually contributed by the manufacturing MSMEs. So you can't do much about them to do it. There are trading concerns in the MSMEs space which do the exports. So you take up you support the MSMEs in the usual way in which you have been doing by providing export credits, interest reliefs, etc. Of late, in last couple of years, the government has also started providing credit guarantees for them for default. That makes actually, to my mind, the MSMEs weaker. They can't compete with the rest of the world in a very and MSMEs actually produce products built by the large companies. Only on that they do the value addition. So we have to make sure that the both the large economy as well as the small scale manufacturing economy grows. Only then we can deal with the rest of the world, even in terms of the FTAs and trades. Otherwise, we will get more swamped by these FTAs than otherwise.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Garg, for joining us on Homework and this enlightening conversation.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Perhaps the best pulse of the union budget is captured by seasoned journalists covering the finance ministry for very long. So let me take this discussion forward with Pallavi Ghosh and Timsi Jaipuria, who have covered many budgets in the past. Pallavi, the economic survey projects, confidence amidst global uncertainty. But how much of this optimism you think is data driven, and what indicators are you watching that maybe they're in the budget to reflect the same?
I found it a mix of optimism and also of caution. It did acknowledge the fact that there was global turmoil. It did mention the fact that the trade tariff talks have not yet found a completion with America. But it also mentions the fact that once those trade tariff differences are ironed out, so things will be fine. But it did talk about, and Timsi would be better than me in this, but politically speaking, when I started reading the economic survey, the eye on the upcoming elections and to project this government with a growing economy was very, very clear. It talks about a spurge in the manufacturing sector, the industrial sector, the labor intensive sectors, and so on and so forth. It talks about more than 6.8% growth story, and how and it also gives in details the FTAs the government has signed up, which according to them is not a win-win for the countries where you signed up the FTA with, but it's also mutually beneficial, because there has been a lot of criticism which has come in from the Congress party. We saw, for example, on the EU-India pact. In that context, the economic survey makes it very clear that it's one, mutually beneficial. Second, it's going to open up a huge market as far as our Indian fishermen are concerned, as far as the agrarian sector is concerned. It also tried to not amplify the fact, and also try to reassure that don't worry, the automobile sector has no reason to be worried about. So I found it a mix of both.
Well, every year, Timsi, the survey promises that the capex will, crowd in private investment. From your reporting experience, are we finally seeing this on the ground, or is public spending still doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to capex?
Well, if you go to the ground, you will see a mix of both. To be fair, government capex has been doing the heavy lifting for the economy, and government has been outrightly talking about it, that our capex is going to boost the economy, and that is what is happening. States have been given their share a lot of jobs are being created. You'll see a lot of public capex actually being seen when it comes to expansion of roads, railways. Our ports are getting modernized, our railway stations are getting modernized. So all that capex is going into there, and that modernization, that rebuilding, that creating of new cities is actually pulling a lot of jobs in, and that is why people are also able to spend. Along with that, when it comes to private investment, well, yes, government still feels that a lot of animal spirits are lacking within the private sector, and private sector now needs to come out yet again, come along with the government, put in a lot of money, and we are seeing some bit of private investment do come in. We saw Apple coming in, we saw many other manufacturing units getting set up here in India. And these are, trying to give us signals. We are seeing a lot of, new manufacturing zones. Tier 2 are seeing a lot of data centers, GCCs coming up. So all those areas are building up jobs, be it in the services sector or in the manufacturing sector. And all of that is actually building in a lot of capacity generation, a lot of consumption, because people are getting more jobs. We saw ELI schemes coming up. We saw PLI taking up big time. A lot of expansion is still needed, not that private investment has done their bit. That's what the government has also been hinting, and we are seeing it in the numbers too, that private investment still lags. But yes, government capex has done the heavy lifting, and in this year's budget too is what I expect, that capex is going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting, but government could be calling private sector. That's what the survey also indicated, that private sector now needs to pitch in big time. They need to come in more forward to build the nation.
Well, Pallavi, the elephant in the room is also the US tariffs and Donald Trump. We have signed a lot of FTAs. The India-EU FTA conclusion is the most recent one. Do you think the FTAs that India has signed will act as a shield, when it comes to countering the US tariffs?
Well, I think the government intention is that, though I think the government is also very, very careful about not putting forward the Indo-UI tariff deal or the FTA as, oh, we are giving a karara jawab to Donald Trump, because obviously they want to have that deal with America as well. But on multiple platforms, the commerce minister, the government has made it very clear that we have a two-pronged approach. Internally, Atmanirbhar Bharat, our MSMEs and the small sectors, they should be given enough prop, and I guess that will be reflected in the union budget also. And that is one way of handling it, so that domestic supply and production, domestic demand increases. But also they talk about looking at alternative markets, newer markets, and signing at the FTAs. I remember one big example he used to give us is that, for example, the jamun from Dehradun to Dubai. Who would have thought that jamun jayega and that will go to Dubai, and the new market, new product relatively. So that is a two-pronged, and in the economic survey, it was mentioned, as you must have read it, very much in detail about the FTAs that India has signed up.
Also this point that last year we got a lot of tax relief, and the people were very happy, the middle class was very happy. Obviously there are more expectations this time, but the economic survey also points to a lot of fiscal discipline. So what is in it for the taxpayer? What's your prediction? Will there be more tax cuts for people like you and me, or should we just be happy with what happened last year and live with it?
As you rightly said, tax cuts are something that everyone keenly watches out for in the budget, especially the common man. It is the part B of the speech that everyone wants to listen in, as to, eagerly waiting as to what is in store for them personally. So that's why it is personal taxes. And my indication till now, with whatever limited interactions that we've had with the government, since government is in quarantine, but tax experts say that a lot has been given in the last 1 year, and precisely so. We saw big bang GST rate cuts coming in, boosting the consumption. A lot of burden of indirect taxes have gone off the shoulders of the people. When it comes to personal taxes, we saw a massive jump in terms of the exemption that we got. 12 lakh rupees of exemption was a huge benefit that the middle class got. But I also see that this government does not hesitate in giving in more if they actually see the fiscal room. And when it comes to the fiscal room, as you rightly mentioned, this survey does point to that. But to an extent, when we see tax collections, if you see direct tax collections per se, they are a little below the buoyancy level that has been mentioned in the budget. And that could be an impediment for the government. But yes, overall, if you see the fiscal space, the fiscal deficit numbers, they are quite contained. And government is okay on that side. So the non-tax revenues are going to actually help the government tide over the tax revenue shortfall that we are seeing, be it on the indirect taxes or on the direct tax side, because of the rate cuts that we saw. Rightly so. If the tax rates are less, the collections are going to be low. So when it comes to the non-tax revenue, RBI's dividend is going to help us. It could be that we could see more dividends coming in from OMCs. The oil companies are comfortable right now as per their position. If you see the profits, etc. So there could be a benefit that we are getting from that side, from the non-tax revenues, and that is going to help the fiscal room of the government. Whether there will be a tax cut or not, very difficult to say. That is a last-minute call that the government takes. Like we saw last year, we rather in our informal interactions with the top government, we actually heard that the tax man was not happy, but the political will was to give that tax cut. So the political will actually led to that rate cut coming in. There could be a scope on two sides. That is STT, the Securities Transaction Tax. That's what experts told me last evening also, that LTCG and STT cannot go together. STT has outlived its life. So there could be a benefit on that side for the middle class, for those who are investing in the markets. And when it comes to standard deduction, again, that 75,000 mark could, if the government thinks that it should be inflation linked, if the government thinks that it should be linked to what today's expenditures are for the people, for the middle class, then there could be a hike on that standard deduction side. However, I have my doubts because, as I said, when I see the numbers, when I see the direct tax collections, they are not that buoyant. The buoyancy is still lagging behind because of the rate cuts that were offered. But will the government go forward and give something new? There is an idea that is floating by the tax experts that there should be some relief for married couples. There should be a double exemption that can be given for those families where only one member is earning.
One last word to Pallavi. Pallavi, what is the one figure that you will really look in the budget and why? And do you think, as Timsy was also saying, does the government political will prevail this time, or will it be fiscal
So let's not
prudence?
forget there are 5 big elections coming up. Multiple off-record briefings with many in the government. The government has often told us that we don't have enough to give now. I mean, we've given everything, whatever you wanted. But as they say, ye dil mange mo. People love tax cuts. So whether that couple tax will happen or not, we'll wait to see. I think I'm going to look at what the government announces for West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Kerala.
Well, we'll have to wait and see if the tax cuts are really coming for the middle class. But as Pallavi correctly puts it, this budget will also have clearly a political tinge as well, because we have key state elections coming up. So asked to go for the budget to be presented by Nirmala Sitharaman, we'll all wait and watch what she has for the common man this time. Thank you so much for joining us on Homework.